Vallabha Girivaradari Jasodhanandana Brajajanarandana Jamunatira Manachari Jaya Radhamadava Kunjam Vihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivraj Acharya Shaturashata Shri Srimad Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Raja Granta Srimad Bhagvatam Ki Jai Gaurvanandi, all glories to the Samud devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Anandana Shalakaya Chakshurunvitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyarevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Fifth Canto, Chapter 18, Text 31. Yad Urupametan Nijamaya Yarpitam Artha Swarupam Baruruparupitam Sankyanayasya Stayatopalambhanat Tasmai Namaste Vyapadesharupine Vyapadesharupine. What was the chant? Yarupametam Jamaya Vitam Arta Surupam Varuruparupitam Sankyanayasyastayato Tasmai Namaste Vyapadesharupine Yadrupametan Nijamaya Yarpitam Arta Sarupam Varuruparupitam Sankyanayasya Tayatopalambhanat Tasmai Namaste Vyapadesharupine Yarupametan Nijamaya Yarpitam Narta Sarupam Varuruparupitam Sankyanayasya Stayatopalambhanat Tasmai namaste Vyapadesharupine. Mother. Yarupametan nijamaya yarpitam. Arta surupam varuruparupitam. Tasmai namaste Vyapadesharupine. Yet, of whom, Rupam, the form, Etat, this, Nijamaya, Arpitam, manifested by your personal potency, Artha Sorupam, this entire visible cosmic manifestation, Bahurupa Rupitam, manifested in various forms, Sankhya, the measurement, not, Yasya, of which, Asti, there is, Ayatha, falsely, Upalambhanat, from perceiving, Tasmai, unto him the Supreme Lord, Namaha, my respectful obeisances, Te, unto you, Avyapadesha, cannot be ascertained by mental speculation. Rupine, whose real form. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jaya. Translation, my dear Lord, this visible cosmic manifestation is a demonstration of your own creative energy. Since the countless varieties of forms within this cosmic manifestation are simply a display of your external energy, this Virata Rupa, universal body, is not your real form. Except for devotee and transcendental consciousness, no one can perceive your actual form. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport, Mayavadi philosophers think the universal form of the Lord to be real and his personal form illusory. We can understand their mistake by a simple example. A fire consists of three elements, heat and light, which are the energy of the fire, and the fire itself. Anyone can understand that the original fire is reality, and that the heat and light are simply the fire's energy. Heat and light are the formless energies of fire, and in that sense they are unreal. Only the fire has form, and therefore it is the real form of the heat and light. As Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita 9:4, Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyaktamurtina. By me and my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. Thus, the impersonal conception of the Lord is like the expansion of the heat and light from a fire. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord also says, Matstani sarvabhutani na chaham teshravastitaha. The entire material creation is resting on Krishna's energy, either material, spiritual, or marginal, but because his form is absent from the expansion of his energy, he is not personally present. The inconceivable expansion of the Supreme Lord's energy is called Achintya Shakti. Therefore, no one can understand the real form of the Lord without becoming his devotee. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jaya. So, prayers are being offered to the form of Kurmadev. And the most significant aspects of the prayer is expressed in the last line, Tasmai Namaste Avyapadesha Rupine. Namaha means obeisances. According to the Padma Purana, the word Ma means ego, and the word Na means the negation of ego. This is a statement of the Padma Purana. So the word Namaha means the relinquishment of one's false ego, of one's own sense proficiency independent of the Supreme Lord. This is the meaning of Namaha. It's an expression of submission, of surrender to the Supreme Lord. The idea is that in order for there to be movement in relationship to the absolute truth, then there has to be death to the false ego. This statement comes, we've heard it before, one has to die to live. So the idea is that in order for there to be movement in the absolute truth, there has to be death to the ego. All Eastern spiritual traditions have an idea of ego effacement or ego death. This is the popular term today. So also we have it in the expression of namaha. Not that one ceases to exist, but in order for one's real ego to be alive and well and moving, then there has to be death to the false ego. So spiritual life can be thought of in two broad divisions. This is identified by our acharyas. There can be two broad divisions to spiritual life. The first half is called anartha-nivritti, and the second half is called artha-pravritti. So artha-pravritti means the positive attainment, whereas anartha-nivritti means the negation of that which is unwanted. So spiritual life can be perceived or thought of, at least as far as our bhakti tradition is concerned, in these two broad categories. Anartha-nivritti means the idea of ego death or ego effacement, and artha-pravritti means movement and love in relationship to the absolute truth. So sometimes some persons think that just by artha-pravritti, without focus on anartha-nivritti, that they will gain the absolute truth. But the reality is that the anarthas have to be almost completely relinquished. Nashra prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktra bhaviti naishtiki. And that's that the anarthas are sufficiently relinquished, then there can be no genuine movement in relationship to the absolute truth, because the anarthas are preventing one from doing so. That's what we were hearing a couple of chapters in Jaya Dharma about, that the importance of Sambandha Gyan, to know the relationship between God and the Jiva and Maya, because there are persons who don't know the relationship, so they don't know how they're being impeded by the material energy. Just like someone says they love God, this is a very common expression of many religious practices. They love God, there's a genuine feeling of love for God, but they don't realize in what ways they're trying to be God, because they don't have information of what the Ishwar Tattva is. What does it mean to be God? And so inadvertently they try to be God sometimes, or they don't have information of what is Maya, so they don't know how they're being influenced by the material nature. And that way their love never develops. So although the idea of love of God is a positive focus and one that is well-reasoned, at the same time, because of lack of sufficient understanding of the impediments, their love never takes firm ground, movement on firm ground. So then there are others though, so that's one side, persons who, let's focus on the positive and movement in relation to absolute truth, but their love never actually develops on account of insufficient removal of anarthas and the proper process to do so. Then there are others who become so focused in on the anartha-nivritti part that they forget that there's actually a positive attainment in spiritual life. And it was all about just getting rid of anarthas, and there's no positive gain. And this way, one has to conceive of the whole thing by hearing from the lips of Guru, so there can be real movement in relationship to the Absolute. So all this idea is expressed by the words namaha. You know, I'm abandoning or sacrificing my ego, giving up the sense of my own proficiency, independent of the Supreme Lord. Self-sacrifice, in other words, and offering my real ego to you. So first anartha-nivritti and then artha-pravritti. So then he's praying to the Supreme Lord, who is avyapadesha rupine. Avyapadesha rupine, Prabhupada translates it here. He cannot be ascertained by mental speculation. This is why he cannot be ascertained by mental speculation, because his form is beyond the material nature. So Krishna describes this in Bhagavad Gita, when he says, Tribir Gunamayer Bhavayar Ibi Sarvam Idam Jagat Mohitam Namijananti Mam Ebhya Param Avyayam. You know this verse? Tribir chapter 7. Krishna says, everyone in this whole Jagat, no one knows me. Mohitam Namijananti. They are all deluded and therefore do not know me, because my form is beyond the material nature. And then he goes on and says in the next verse, Daiviyesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Dharataya, that this material nature, which is creating a curtain by which you're not able to know me, is insurmountable. Mama Maya Dharataya. But Mameva Ye Prapadyante Mayami Tam Tarantite. If they surrender onto me, then by my mercy they can be known. That's the idea. Krishna also says Later on in Bhagavad Gita, what is that verse? Mam chayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate saguna samatita tam brahmabhuyaya kalpate. By bhakti, one can jump over the gunas and realize Brahman, realize himself. So in this way, by these two verses, you can understand that Sharanagati, or surrender to God, and bhakti are more or less the same thing. But bhakti without surrender to Krishna doesn't yield any fruit. It is like a form it's like a body without a soul. In other words, the soul of bhakti is surrender. So when one applies the angas of bhakti without actual sharanagati or surrender to the Supreme Lord, then there's little movement in terms of spiritual progress in relation to the absolute truth. This is been identified by a chart. Just like, what is the use of a body without surrender? And or without a soul. What is the use of a body without a soul? It's lifeless. So similarly, the application of bhakti without surrender doesn't have much life in terms of realization of the absolute truth. That's what we were hearing about last night when we were reading. That people they also chant, they may even also worship the deity and so on, but they do so with a material conception of life. There is no actual surrender to the Supreme Lord. So their application yields no fruit. So in order for bhakti to be fruitful in terms of the actual goal of bhakti, which is pure love of God, then there has to be surrender. Surrender is the soul of bhakti. And surrender, although we generally hear that surrender is a process, we hear about the process of surrender. So this usually makes us tend to throw it out, deep consideration of what surrender is, because, it's a process, and we just take it for granted that we're already in the process. And so we don't consider what it means to be surrendered to the Supreme Lord. Because I've already started. I started chanting japa, I come in the morning program, I'm reading the books, I'm following. So therefore, I'm obviously, I'm not surrendered yet, but I'm in the process of surrender. So that is true, of course, there's no doubt about that. We've started the process. But the stage of surrender actually has been identified by our acharyas. There's an actual stage of surrender. So although surrender is a process, there's an actual stage of being surrendered, or sharanagati, the actual attainment of the surrendered position. And that stage of bhakti has been identified as ruchi, but at least by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's the actual stage of surrender. And he explains that at that stage, there's two symptoms of being surrendered, primarily, two broad divisions of surrender. The first one is that there is no tendency for activity in relationship to matter, karma or gyan. No materialistic tendency can be found in his behavior. And everything he does is for the absolute truth in body, mind, and speech. So that's a simple statement, but if you have to think about it, what that actually means on a practical level, that's profound. Everything that he does with his body, mind, and speech is only for Krishna. And this is not even a stage of absolute pure devotion to Krishna yet, or bhava. But it's a stage that will actually get us there. So he's thinking this way: with his body, mind, and speech, there is only thoughts of Krishna, only speaking of Krishna, only acting in relationship to Krishna, and no tendency for fruitive activity can be found in his character. So that stage has been identified as stage ruchi. Nadanam, najanam, nasundarim, kavitam va jagadisha kamaye, amajamani jamanishware, bhavatal bhaktir ahetuki tvayi. This is the actual stage of surrender. So we're in the process of surrender. We're in the process of actually becoming surrendered. When we actually become surrendered, then bhakti, the application of the angas of bhakti, has the power to attract the mercy of the Lord. That's the idea. Of course, in one sense, the Lord is always independent, but he's also inclined towards those who do his worship. That he makes that statement in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, where he says, I'm equal to all, but those who worship me, I like them. So, which is natural. This is natural. So those who do his bhakti, he is naturally inclined towards them, although his mercy is independent. So when one takes up the angas of bhakti with surrender consciousness, such surrendered devotional practices have the power to attract the mercy of God. That mercy of God, of course, is his Swarup Shakti. And when the Supreme Lord extends his Swarup Shakti to us, then we can see God. So the verse says here, he's not ascertained by mental speculation, or he's not known by mental speculation. So God cannot be known by our own strength. He's not like mundane knowledge that can be captured, but he can be known only when he extends himself to us. Just like our mind appears to be alive and well, causing all sorts of difficulties for us. But actually, the mind is just dead matter. It's not alive at all. But the reason it appears to have life is because our consciousness has extended itself to the mind. And so due to the influence of consciousness, the mind appears to actually be alive and causing us a lot of trouble. But if the consciousness didn't extend itself to the mind can have no influence on the soul. Therefore, you often hear us say, neglect the mind. This is a way of dealing with neglect the mind. Of course, that's much easier said than done, because the mind is something like a little kid who's trying to get your attention. I often mention, suppose you're like talking to a friend or something, and the kid wants your attention, he starts poking you. And you're just ignoring it, and talking to you, but he keeps poking you, if he keeps poking you. And so finally like, what do you want? You get frustrated. So the mind is something similar to that even if when our consciousness, we try to direct our consciousness away from the mind and towards Krishna, the mind keeps annoying us. Haribo, 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 until we give attention to it. And then once we lend our consciousness to it, then it can take over. It seems to be all powerful. In fact, Krishna says it has godlike power once we lend our consciousness to it. Otherwise, without our lending our consciousness to the mind can exert no influence on the soul. So similarly, unless Krishna, I'm using this in a poetic sense, unless he lends his consciousness to us, we cannot know him. There can be no connection to him. So that lending of consciousness, I'm using it in a poetic sense, is Krishna extending his Swarup Shakti. It's like he's extending his consciousness to us. Otherwise, our body, mind, and senses are actually dead. They have no ability to know anything. But when Krishna extends his consciousness to us, so to speak, Swarup Shakti, his internal potency, then all of a sudden our body, mind, and senses become alive and can actually know Krishna. So how do we attract such mercy? By the application of the devotional service with a surrendered consciousness. So in the beginning of our spiritual life, like I said, the first stage is anajna vritti. The first stage of our life is the process of surrender. We're trying to come to a stage of being actually surrendered. And then application of bhakti attracts that mercy of the Lord. Now it's not that after I get the mercy of the Lord, then surrender is not a topic anymore. It's like, okay, I reached the stage of surrender, and now the next stage is without surrender. The idea is that one stage is one of self-sacrifice, and in the higher stages of surrender, it's one of self-forgetfulness, which is a term I came across yesterday that I appreciated. Atmanivedanam. So Atmanivedanam looks very similar to surrender, but the idea in Atmanivedanam that there's self-forgetfulness. Surrender is like I'm sacrificing, I really want to act independently. I have a tendency to do what I want, but I'm going to sacrifice that and do what is pleasing to Krishna. So there's a sense of there's a sense of separateness, perhaps, and then I have to give of myself. And at higher levels of surrender, there's self-forgetfulness. So there's no question of acting independent of Krishna. So surrender continues, but it has to start with a deep level of self-sacrifice, which we're trying to develop, of course. And then when we apply devotional principles with the deep level of sacrifice, that has the power to attract the mercy of the Lord. So that's the express tasmai namaste avyapadesharupine, that I'm surrendering myself unto you, because you're not known by mental speculation. In other words, you are known only by your mercy. So Prabhupada does add that in translation. You're known by your devotees who have been imbued with the Daivipakriti, and by which they can actually know you. So then, after expressing this idea, he points out that your real form can only be known in this way. But then the idea here is to express that everything is actually the form of God. He's making this point here, that everything is actually your form. And nija mayaya arpitam. Everything is actually your form, only in the sense that your Shakti is not different from you. And therefore everything is actually you. There can be nothing but you. But the difference between your real form and the forms that we see in this material world is that these forms are not temporary, or are temporary. They have no substantial status. Although the Maya Shakti which produces them is real, the forms created by the material potency are substanceless. So I don't know if that's a word, substanceless. And useless. The idea that is given in the Bhagavatam is that of, what do you call it, putty or modeling clay? Modeling clay. You can take the modeling clay is real, per analogy, but the forms you create out of the modeling clay are useless and without substance. So if you take modeling clay and you create a house, you're not going to try to live in it. Hopefully, presumably, unless you're like psychotic or something. You're not going to try to live inside the house made of modeling clay. Nor if the modeling clay has a form of a tiger, you're not going to be afraid of it. So those forms have no real substance. So although the clay is real, the forms created by the clay are insubstantial and temporary. So similarly, although Krishna's Maya Shakti is real and not different from him, and therefore everything we see in this cosmos is him, the forms created by that potency are unreal. They're just distracting. And this is kind of the idea that he's expressing, that the Bahurupa Rupitam, this form of yours, produced by the Maya Shakti, is creating all sorts of variety of forms, human beings, animals, insects, etc., various types of species. And they're not actually substantial form, they actually hide your real form in the material world. The soul is actually looking for that form that would be most satisfying for him. That is the quest of the soul. The idea is expressed nicely in Parikshit Maharaj's search for Krishna. He sees Krishna in the womb of his mother, and after he takes birth, he's always looking for that form of Krishna. Are you that form? Are you that form? Are you that form? He's always, therefore his name Parikshit means to examine. He's examining, are you that personality I'm looking for? Are you that personality? So we're looking for the form that would be most satisfying for having exchange a relationship with. What happens is that the real form of the Lord, as Prabhupada is using that language here, is being covered by all these other forms, which are just simply distracting and manipulating. The forms in this material world manipulate our consciousness. They draw out of us the tendency to romanticize about what it would be like. That's what the forms in this material world do. You see various forms and you get struck by that romantic fever. Oh, it could be like this, it could be like that, it could be like this. And that way your consciousness is captured by these false illusory forms, so much so that we don't give any attention to the real form of the Lord. So he's saying that all these forms are actually real, are unreal and distracting. And your real form is not known because it cannot be known unless you extend yourself to us. And therefore, my dear Lord, I'm surrendering myself unto you. And praying. Why is he praying? Because I'm looking for your mercy in the form of the descent of Daivipakriti. Imbue me with devotion so that I'll be able to know you and know that form that is actually satisfying. Otherwise, we continue to roam around the material world, searching in our quest for that form which will provide the most profound level of experience. And of course, we're always disappointed in the material world. And no matter how nice things seem to be, the tendency of conditioned souls is not the tendency of the conditioned soul. The tendency of the soul is to take shelter, because that's his natural constitutional position. So seeing all these other forms, he tries to take shelter of these various forms which will never be able to ultimately satisfy him because they're not Krishna directly. So this happens, of course, this happens even in devotee relations, that we think that I can find full satisfaction in one of the material forms of this material world, and we're inevitably always disappointed. So what makes devotee sangha so sacred is that they do direct our consciousness progressively towards Krishna, knowing that I alone cannot be a shelter for any jiva. Only when I'm endowed with the power of Krishna and Krishna consciousness can I actually provide some level of shelter for the jiva. So in this way, the theme is going to continue on, but it's going to try to point our attention towards the real form of Krishna, which is actually our shelter, as opposed to the material forms which are actually distracting and binding us to the material world. So those are some ideas here that
Thank you very much for your class. Very thought-provoking. I have two questions. In the beginning of your class, you were explaining Artha Pravritti and Anartha Nivritti. You're explaining how if someone just focuses on the Artha Pravritti, then prematurely. And I was just seeking some clarification because my understanding was that through Artha Pravritti, Anartha Nivritti takes place.
No, it doesn't at first. When one attains the stage of Artha Pravritti, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta clearly says about this point. Then he says such persons do not need to, they don't concern themselves with Anartha Nivritti any longer. It happens automatically. But before you are at the stage of positive attainment, there's a stage of Anartha Nivritti. That has to be, that is an aspect of focus for those who are in the beginning stages of their bhajan. Therefore, he composed his literature called Prakrita Rasa Shatadushini, 100 verses describing what is material rasa. And in that, he's criticizing mostly the imitationists, the sahajiyas, as we generally think of them. And he's criticizing that how they're giving their disciples, either the Ekadasha Bhava, the initiation into a form in Krishna Lila, the various modes of expression, and these people are infested with anarthas. He uses that word. I forget the exact word he uses, but the translation came infested with anarthas. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta took issue with that. He didn't take issue with the principle because Siddha Pranali is real. According to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, it's a process that comes from the spiritual world. So it's a real, genuine thing. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta took issue with the way it was being practiced. People who weren't on a high elevated stage of Krishna consciousness were taking the post of guru and then giving to their disciples these various high-level forms of meditation, and which they could not practice properly because the anarthas were blocking them. So in the first provision of spiritual life, there is the focus. I don't want to use the word focus as such. The focus is on the various angas of bhakti and surrendering more deeply to Krishna. But there is awareness of the movement of material influences in us. When the heart becomes spontaneous, then although anarthas are still present, it need not be focused on because the heart spontaneously moving towards Krishna, towards perfection, it does not concern himself with those things. He doesn't have to because the movement is very strong. But those who tend to think that they can focus on that aspect without having first attained a solid platform in devotional service, like Nishta, Ruchi, then what happens is their anarthas prevent them from moving forward. That's why I gave the example of the Christians. They talk about love of God, but they don't know how they're being impeded by material energy. They're not aware of it. And so also we tend to try to focus prematurely on just a positive attainment without having come to a solid ground for movement in the positive realm, namely beginning with Nishta, where there's actually absorption and bhajan. The stage of Nishta means absorption in bhajan. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also qualifies it by saying there are 5 things that kind of indicate that one is at the stage of Nishta. I don't remember what the 5 things are. Madhurya Kandabhi. The first one is that the tendency to sleep during devotional practices is abandoned. So, the other, so already just with that one, that's like a blowout. That's a blowout right there. And then the second one that he mentions is no distraction during the activities of bhajan. Another one he mentions is, I don't know if it was mentioned in this particular list. Another one that he mentions is not being bewildered by negative emotions during practices of bhajan, like lust, anger, greed, and so on, and pride during practice of bhajan. These things will be absent, and the person who's nishta, that's not even like so exalted in terms of what could be attained, but from our perspective, that's pretty good. And then another one he mentions is that, anyway, I don't remember, I can read them to you later. There are 5 points that he mentions. So my point is that first there should be solid ground, and then there can be positive movement. That's my point. Just like the caterpillar, when he's moving from leaf to leaf, he moves very carefully. I think this is how it's described. He goes to one leaf, and then once he knows that leaf is solid, then he moves to the next. Or the example can be given when we're walking. When we're walking, you make sure that the ground you're standing on is solid, and then you take the next step forward. Then it's solid, then you take the next step forward. Without being on solid ground, how can you step forward? So there has to be solid ground for there to be positive movement. And therefore, the solid ground has to be created by the removal of anarthas. That doesn't mean we focus on anarthas, we focus on the instructions given to us by Guru. That's the beginning of devotional service, whatever the Guru is instructing in the beginning. By that, we remove anarthas, we move to positive ground, and then there can be positive movement. That's called artha pravritti. This is described by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and the only place where he ever talked about Ashtakaliya Leela, at least known, openly talked about Ashtakaliya Leela to his disciples. It was a very famous thing. You probably type in artha pravritti in the computer to pop up, one of the first things pop up from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. He describes it there in this way. Okay, you want to say something?
I had a second question.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. When you were discussing, thank you for the first answer, when you were discussing surrender, I remembered something I just read recently, that there's two types of surrendering. One type of person surrenders to the Lord because there's no other shelter, and another type of person is trying to surrender to the Lord, but there's adversities in his path, and so he also takes shelter of the Lord. So, do we fall into that second category?
Probably. The idea is that we've taken our bhakti, but our heart is still indifferent towards the Lord, towards the Vaishnavas. We still experience great indifference. Well, that's if we're lucky. If you're lucky, well, actually, I don't know if having negative feelings towards Vaishnava is better than indifference. Because indifference is really bad. I think negativity is a little bit better. At least there's some relation with the devotee. and negativity, when there's indifference, that's really bad. Like, I don't care either way. So then, yes, that's described that, and Bhakti Sundarbha also, I read it there as well. That when the heart is indifferent, for those who've taken up bhakti, their heart is indifferent towards the Lord, towards Vaishnavas, then they also take refuge in the Lord. This is the idea. Surrender. I need to surrender. Yeah, intelligence, Buddha Yoga. Buddha Yoga. The sadhana bhakti means Buddha Yoga, the application of intelligence. By our intelligence, we're making positive gain in spiritual life. You know, there needs to be a good balance of head and heart. But in the beginning stages of devotional service, head is more prominent because it has to be, because of the various impediments in the heart. And then as Nasha Prayeshu Abhijayeshu, as a vast majority of those impediments are removed, then the heart really starts to take over. And then there's an incessant movement towards the absolute, like the Ganges River going towards the sea.
What is the difference between spiritual relationship and emotional relationship? It seems to be condemned in Bhagvatam throughout.
Emotional.
Yeah.
Oh, I would.
So just slightly one or two sentences. So in Bhagavatam, emotional relationship is condemned in the form of relationship with your family members, your wife specifically. So I always, I never understand whether there is a huge difference between emotional relationship with the wife versus with the wife who is obviously trying to be a devotee versus with other brahmacharis. Is there a big difference between that? If so, if there is no difference, then how can we? What is actually a spiritual relationship? And how do we make sure? How do we know whether we are emotionally attached to a devotee or spiritually attached to a devotee?
Well, bhakti is a path of cultivating emotions, actually. So we should know it is an emotional path, actually, that we're following. Yeah, even so, we should know that it cannot. Bhakti, even in the neophyte stages, cannot be devoid of emotion. In fact, that isn't a component. Otherwise, if the heart is devoid of emotion, then he's qualified for jnana yoga. This is what Krishna describes. There's just complete neutrality or aversion towards anything material, and he considers a relationship as also being material. And therefore, his heart is completely hardened to the external atmosphere in any way. All sorts of family members, friends, that heart becomes completely distanced from all of that in Jnana Yoga. Krishna says in Bhakti Yoga that's not good because the emotion is going to be required for further movement in devotional service. So this is a general point. Emotions is an important aspect of our movement in Bhakti. Because we have anartas, in the beginning stages we have all the vidis and the nishedas, all the rules and regulations or rules and prohibitions in order to keep the emotions from being governed just by material rasa. When the material rasa isn't achieved, then I'm sad, I'm bewildered, etc. So you have all these rules and regulations just to help us keep our intelligence from being captured by the material concept of life. That's why all the rules and regulations are there in the beginning. They're there to actually help our emotion. The example given by Bhaktivinoda Thakur is that everyone has raga or emotional attraction. But in the conditioned state, our emotional attraction is in relationship to matter. So we're in a disease condition. So he compares the process of Vaidhi Bhakti to medicine. Just like medicine will help a sick body, many of us devotees are getting sick in the ashram. So you take medicine to help a sick body. So similarly, the rules of Vaidhi Bhakti are like medicine for our sick raga, our sick emotional attraction to the material nature. It is a help to govern that raga and move it therapeutically towards a healthy state. So not to destroy it, but to help it shift towards its rightful aim and spiritual, its rightful prospect and spiritual and a spiritual goal. So you mentioned the relationship particularly with the wife and how that might be different or the same with the relationship with brahmacharis. And the point is that one's relationship with one's wife or with the brahmacharis, there should be affection and dealings. There should be emotion involved. This is described by Rupa Goswami as Guham Akyati Prichati, right? Now, if you want a good example of Guham Akyati Prichati, all you have to do is study the Bhagavatam. All the exchanges in the Bhagavatam between guru and disciple generally is Guhyam Akyati Prichati, and they're not devoid of emotion. Many of them are extremely emotional. Now, we can say that some of those examples are, of course, they're like extremely exalted personalities, and so their emotions are not misguided as our emotions tend to be. So we may not be able to always follow that level of example. But like the level of Vyasadeva, where he's honestly admitting his deficiency and his attempt to do something favorable for humanity and so on, he brings that emotion to his spiritual master and asks for assistance. Or Dhruva Maharaj, maybe another such example, and so on. So emotion is certainly involved in spiritual life. When does it become fully spiritual? That's when persons are at higher levels of devotional service. But it's still spiritual if one follows the guidelines for helping to keep our emotions looking towards this higher prospect in spiritual life. In other words, sometimes people get so into each other and they forget about Krishna, they forget about devotional service, really. Devotional service becomes more like a social, what do you call it? An arrangement for social interaction, more than we're coming together to actually glorify Krishna. We're coming together to socialize, and chanting Harinam is just part of the atmosphere for that socialization. So that's obviously material. That's what we call material relationship. Of course, it's nice. It feels nice in the beginning. But what is nice in the beginning often turns out to be poison in the end, because people are not actually Krishna conscious in their approach.
So clarification. I don't see a huge emotion flowing between Narada and Vyasadeva, or Dhruva and Narada and Dhruva. I see that both Dhruva needs something and Vyasadeva is unhappy basically, so they basically took some guidance, just like you would take guidance from a teacher if you have some problem and you don't know how to solve the problem, or you go to a counselor and it could be a spiritual counselor and get a solution worked out. Why do you say that's full of emotions? I didn't see anything.
Maybe because I read the verses. If you read the verses, they're full of emotional expressions. And maybe because our heart is not open to that, we don't always perceive it. Which is what makes the Bhagavatam hard to understand. Because the whole Bhagavatam is actually a rasa shastra. The whole, that means from beginning to the end is full of rasa. According to Gaudiya Vaishnavas, from beginning to end, the Bhagavatam is speaking about Radharani. Can you find it out? I definitely can't find it out in this 5th canto. Where is Srimad Radharani? Nowhere is she hardly even mentioned. But the Gaudiya Acharyas have told that from beginning to end, Radha is being discussed, and her moods of devotion are being delineated for those who have the eyes to see. Unfortunately, because our hearts have yet to open to that reality, we don't perceive it. And therefore, we have access to it only by the mercy of the Acharyas. Whatever little access we have to it will be by the mercy of the Acharyas. So also, generally, when our hearts are themselves closed off, for whatever reasons they may be closed off, then that also closes off our vision to some of the subtler realities. Emotional exchanges are quite, there's, well, I don't even think they're that subtle, but in the Bhagavatam, the verses that are, with even the same examples with Dhruva Maharaj, and in Dhruva Maharaj's case, there was great anger, and there was great honesty, straightforwardness. Yeah, these are the pinnacle of sentiments. But that doesn't mean that these other examples are devoid. They're deeply emotional. For example, another example from the 1st canto, Parikshit Maharaj is cursed. So the disciple of Shamika Rishi, his name was Gaurmukha. I just found this out the other day. The disciple's name was Gaurmukha. So he delivers a message to Parikshit Maharaj. Shamika Rishi was too embarrassed to come himself because he was feeling so guilty about his son cursing. So then Parikshit Maharaj thought to himself that I should go over and see Shamika Rishi and tell him that it's all alright and okay. But he thought not to do that because he says, because he was not able to come himself, he's obviously feeling very embarrassed. And then I don't want to embarrass him more and make him feel even more guilty. Therefore, I'll just stay back. And anyway, I'm not disappointed that this curse has come. I consider this to be a very auspicious. So this is a deeply, emotion is being involved there. It's not maybe the pinnacle of expression of love, but that's a deep sentiment. How many of us could think like that? Well, I guess it depends on, I would disagree with you. It depends on the eye that you're looking for. For those who are going through intense situations in their life, that, like, being cursed to die is a serious thing. I don't think many of us would deal with that too good. You know, if one of the brahmacharis say, you know, Siddhartha, you're a little bit too much for me, I curse you to die in 7 days. And then I don't think you would be saying, well, that's not that, you know, I forgive you. And then you say, well, that's not an emotional. That's a highly emotionally charged situation. Being cursed to die is a highly emotionally charged. None of us would be able to deal with that in a safe consciousness. If someone calls us a bad name, we're miserable for the whole day. You know, our consciousness is not able to deal with it. How could he say that to me? How he could do that to me? So I think that it is highly emotional charge. And it shows the greatness of the heart of Parikshit Maharaj, that despite of being in that situation, which is not very nice, he took it in a very positive way, and he was accommodating for Shamika Rishi. I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want him to feel more humiliated, so I'm going to stay away. And also, I feel this curse is very auspicious. So there's nothing to in any way complain. That's a deep emotion, actually. Just as deep as the emotion of forgiveness. Forgiveness externally doesn't look that profound. It's just like, oh, no big deal. You're forgiven. But anyone who's ever felt betrayed or felt slighted in any way, then you can understand how profound an emotion of forgiveness actually is, even though externally it doesn't look that deep. When Durvasa Muni tried to kill Ambarish Maharaj, and then when he comes back to Ambarish Maharaj was like, there's no big deal. He wasn't at all disturbed. And then he said, well, you know, this chakras behind me is kind of going to kill me. Can you do something about that? And then Ambarish Maharaj said, okay. He started offering prayers. But he didn't have any negativity towards Durvasa Muni. That's a very deep emotion. Although externally it doesn't look that profound, it's a very deep, and any one of us who ever felt slighted in any way, we know how deep the emotion of forgiveness is because we can't practice it. we try to forgive, but during japa, our minds keep bringing us back to that betrayal situation, and we're miserable. We're miserable like anything. And whereas Durvasa Muni, someone tried to kill him, and he's not, there's no problem, I forgive you, it's not a big deal. In fact, he felt embarrassed forgiving him. He came and said, please forgive me. He said, why are you coming for forgiveness? You didn't do anything wrong. These are very profound emotions. They're very, very profound and very hard to apply, in fact. Prahlad Maharaj, same example. How can he pray for the welfare of his father? It'd be very difficult. I didn't grow up with my father. He left our family when I was 5 years old. And from that time on until I was about 18, before I came in contact with the Krishna consciousness movement, I had a lot of negativity pent up in my heart. A lot of negativity. And then people can try to, I met many of my father's friends in between those years. And they would say things like, your father really loves you and he really cares for you. And I'm like, yeah, that's why he left me and doesn't contact me ever. And yeah, I'm sure I can really feel the love. There was a lot of negativity there. I couldn't find it in my heart to forgive. And that was also augmented by other things as well. And then when I came in contact with SSR the first night and I heard about the law of karma, I was reading Prabhupada's books. And then I kind of took it as, well, this is my karma. I was supposed to experience this for some reason. Immediately I felt a lot of negativity lift off my heart. And I felt no animosity toward my father. And then I was able to actually go see him, talk to him. I just talked to him for the other day after 2 or 3 years. He called me spontaneously because he met Vaishnava Sevananda. And I was talking, I was having a decent conversation with him that I was never able to have when I was growing up because I had so much negativity toward him. Just by a little bit of transcendental knowledge, my emotions actually developed. Even though it doesn't look that profound externally. What's the big deal in having a conversation with a father who didn't take care of you? But it's actually quite profound. So it is because our hearts have not developed so deeply yet that we can't see the subtleties of the emotional exchanges that are actually taking place. And as our hearts develop more and more and more, we will come to perceive that and we'll come to appreciate it. And we'll come to want to cultivate that in a deeper sort of way. So I say those emotions are very profound. The very fact, another way, just using the same analogies of Dhruva and Vyasadeva, to be able to honestly express themselves is a very powerful emotion. I know dealing in the community, how many of us feel suffocated where we're not able to express ourselves. I hear this all the time from practically all of us. We want to say something and we feel that we can't. We feel even if I say something, I won't be heard. So many things. So even able to express your difficulty, honestly, is a profound emotion. Where you have the courage to do so and so on. So therefore, we have to cultivate our hearts. Then we will get more insight into all these exchanges, which are also found in Krishna Lila, and then more things are also found in Krishna Lila, which are very profound. Does that help? I think I feel convinced at least. Okay, let Terrence ask a question and then.
Krishna, my question is in relationship to what you were speaking on earlier in class with material and spiritual emotions. I know it's often said with a lot of devotees how we should maintain I guess a simple mood with dealing with family members is just people that we have some attachment to. But what in cases if you find that your activities in Krishna consciousness sort of brings your family to a deeper realization of who you are? Because I know it's not really stressed upon like the family attachments, like that's looked at as sometimes of something of adherence to you becoming more fixed. But in my case, I've seen with me practicing Krishna consciousness, it's made my family more receptive and actually build my relationships up.
There's no hard line. Again, the expressions in the Shastras that speak so heavily about these things, they're important. We were hearing this yesterday. One reason that there's a lot of heavy discussion about family attachment to the wife, and so on, is because we have a tendency to be an illusion about these things. There's a strong tendency to be bewildered. And so the Shastra has to keep reminding us about the illusory nature of those relations in order to help us get proper perspective. This is a point that was made by Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj, which I appreciated. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't automatically mean that there should be no relation with the family per se, or we should just cut them out and so on. One has to see what is the situation like. For a devotee who surrendered, he's trying to Anukuyena, Sankalpa, Pratikuyena, Varjana. These are the first symptoms of surrender. That one accepts what is favorable for devotional service, and one rejects the language issues, that which is unfavorable for devotional service. So sometimes it may be seen that a person's family is extremely antagonistic. And in such a circumstance, the devotee may choose to keep himself aloof from such association on account of the extreme negativity, which distracts him from spiritual life. And I would venture to say that they would probably do this anyway in terms of their material life. If they weren't spiritual, if their family was very antagonistic to what they were pursuing materially, I bet you they will keep away because it's an impediment to what they're trying to achieve materially. So also spiritually. But if it is seen that the family is favorable, then the devotee compassionately tries to make them more favorable and see in what ways he can make them Krishna conscious, or at least contribute to their further spirituality, whatever it may be. So he keeps friendly dealings, in other words. Acharya Nishcha went to go visit his family. They came here for Christmas. He was walking out during Maharaj's class on Christmas. And I didn't walk up to him and say, where are you going? He said, I'm going to see family for Christmas. What? You in Maya? Mohitam Namajananti Mamena. Started quoting verses and so on. Because the family is favorable, and particularly his sister and her husband, they're very favorable. So keeping that potential for Krishna consciousness open by his favorable dealings with them, it becomes nice, it becomes auspicious, it becomes compassion. So there's no black and white. Every person's life is different. But as a general criteria for our application, we see, is this favorable or unfavorable? Sometimes the relationship with the family is very unfavorable, so the devotee may choose to keep himself aloof. And that is reasonable. Yeah, definitely. 8:20.
Prabhu, there's two parts to the question. One is the form in the material world is unreal. It's mentioned here, but is it
unreal? Means unreal or it's temporary.
Temporary. Okay.
Just like the form of the modeling clay is unreal. The tiger is really unreal as such, or the house is unreal, in that it's just manifested shortly and then destroyed. And we allow ourselves to become bewildered by that. It's also unreal in the sense that it's dead matter. So all the forms in this material world are unreal in that they lack consciousness, actually. And what only makes it seem to be real is because of the conscious jiva. It's just like the TV. If the TV was playing and no one was watching it, who would care? Only when we look at the TV and extend our consciousness to it does it have any meaning whatsoever. So similarly, the forms in this world are meaningful only because the conscious jiva is aware of them or investing consciousness in them. Otherwise, they're unreal in the sense they have no meaning. It has no substance. Just like a clay house is substanceless or meaningless.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify, the difference between unreal and temporary.
Yeah, sometimes the word unreal is used though in the Shastras. It would describe them as unreal, but we understand it in this way. Unreal means it is temporary. And substance without substance, insubstantial.
And second part is probably like, how can we detach ourselves from that temporary and bring our consciousness to the real form? There are like what practical things or what can we do?
I mean, that's the eternal question, We're bewildered by duality, what to do, Obviously, without being, the answer to the question, which is probably going to be dissatisfying, is that you have to become more Krishna conscious. That is really the solution to all these, problems with the material world. This issue, that issue, what to do. It's like, well, become more Krishna conscious. That's not very satisfying, but that's the answer, actually. So then how do we become more Krishna conscious? Then our method is through the process of hearing, chanting, and so on. Sadhu Sangha is our prospect in spiritual life. By associating with sadhus and by the intense hearing of Krishna conscious, the heart is purified, and one day things start to make sense. There's a saying that Krishna consciousness is caught more than it's taught. And there's something Braj Bihari Prabhu, he liked to say that I always remembered this, that Krishna consciousness is caught more than it's taught. And the idea is that it's taught, and as you're hearing more and more and more, you're getting purified, And all of a sudden, at a certain stage of purity, you get it. The light bulb goes on. Wait a minute. This is all just temporary. It's a waste of time, you know. She said that to me. He did this to me. Like, wait a minute. The light bulb comes on. So as we become more and more absorbed in bhajan, actually, hearing, chanting, remembering, service to sadhus, particularly by hearing from them and so on, then, there's a nice verse in the second chapter of the 10th canto where it says that the sadhus, they're so absorbed in hearing and chanting with each other that they don't even notice material worlds going by. And I always appreciated that. It's a verse by the demigods, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes it in this way. They're so like into the discussions about Krishna, which can be had even for us, although for us the emphasis may be more philosophical than it is Leela based. But whatever based, you're so into the katha that you don't even notice the material existence is passing by. And so there has to be that level of absorption. There is no other quick fix to the solution. We have to become more Krishna conscious. So a lot of the Shastra does speak about the temporality of the material world just to help us to get that. And then as we hear it more and more and more and more, hear it more and more and more and more, hear it more and more and more and more, then you catch it one day. Oh, wait a minute, it really does happen like that, actually. Just like some of us had really bad anarthas, had. That's a little bit being nice. We had anarthas that were like really, really deep, and we thought we would never overcome them, Just like when I first came to Krishna consciousness, I was like, how could I give up Buffalo Joe's chicken? It was a type of anyone with a black body. That's why he's laughing. Anyone with a black body, we know what is Buffalo Joe's. Practically speaking, all these they have one on Howard Street that I used to even go to. And when you go to Buffalo Joe's, you only see black bodies most of the time in Buffalo Joe's. So when I first read Prabhupada's books and about vegetarianism, and I accepted that. In fact, I started trying to practice vegetarianism right away. But I was always meditating on Buffalo Joe's. I was like, how do I give up Buffalo Joe's? And it was like really a really difficult thing. How am I going to give up Buffalo Joe's? And then all of a sudden, the thought of Buffalo Joe's went away. It was a constant meditation. Like, I need to go to Buffalo Joe's. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't thinking about it anymore. I was just because I was associating with devotees daily, twice a day. I would come from my home was 20 minutes away, so I would walk in the morning, participate. I would come back in the evening, taking prasadam, hanging out with devotees, doing kirtan, and all of a sudden those things were not important for me. When I moved into the ashram, I brought a huge black book of CDs. So I can't hear Hare Krishna all day. That's outrageous. How will I be able to function without some Lauryn Hill and some Coldplay? And these are some of the artists I had to listen to. And then I brought it into my room. I had it in my locker and everything. And then I got into hearing Ayendra Prabhu's Vrindavan Mellows. And I didn't even like it at first, but as I was hearing it more and more and more, I was like, oh, it's got a cool little groove to it. And all of a sudden I got into hearing Ayendra Prabhu all the time that I didn't even listen to those CDs for 2-3 years. And then they were just sitting in my locker in the same spot for 2-3 years, and then I just threw them out. And it wasn't like I was trying to give them up. I was trying to remain attached to them. And yet, through the process of hearing, chanting, associating, it went away. So in this way, Krishna consciousness is mystical. Because oftentimes we do find ourselves getting released from certain things without sometimes we put like a lot of effort and it doesn't go away. Another example, I'm giving different examples. I was having me and Himanshu, after our first trip to Vrindavan, we're having some major issues with our friendship. They seemed unsolvable. And we were trying to solve it in a direct sort of way. So we went to Nityananda Prabhu. We were trying all these, and nothing was working. It was like a tolerance. Okay, I still like you in a general sort of sense, but there was something that was blocking the exchange. So one day we were in my room, and I was reading a purport from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's. We were discussing about fault finding with myself. I think Manang Sundar was a friend of mine, and his friend, and then Himanshu was there. So we were just reading this particular, hearing some Krishna Katha, and all of a sudden, just by hearing that one thing, that issue got evaporated, like immediately, just by hearing that one sound vibration. Then everything got corrected. We were able to continue on it with the friendship, which was continuing on a tottering ground because of whatever negativity I built up. So in this way, Krishna consciousness has a very mystical element to it. And also, if we lend our energies to the process of Krishna consciousness, then we'll find ourselves our consciousness mystically moves from matter to spirit. To the degree we avail ourselves to the facilities of Krishna consciousness. Like that. I don't know if that's satisfying, but I don't know if there's any other answer, really. Alright, so I went a little bit over. Sorry about that. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.